Testing. Jonas, can you hear me? Cool. Um, is the type... Okay. All right, so just checking if everything is working. Jonas, can you hear me? Check, check. 1, 2. Okay. Cool. All right. Now, this is a very interesting experience, and the first on my behalf. Welcome, everybody. I hope you guys managed to have TouchDesigner installed and have everything up and running. Let me just go quickly through my checklist. So yeah, like those of you that are new to what we're doing here, Jonas and I teach this course at Hyper Island in Stockholm every year called Exploring Technology. And during this course, we teach the students about all sorts of different things and tools that they can use to make installations or interactive elements, creating video games, for example, but also art pieces. And considering everybody is stuck at home at the moment, we figured it's maybe a good idea to pick this up and make it available to everybody, and just keep on learning. So today we're going to look at the introduction of TouchDesigner. For those of you that are new to TouchDesigner, this is a node-based programming environment. You can do all sorts of things, and it's partly connecting little boxes together, and it's partly writing little bits of code. And today will be a beginner-friendly course, so if you've never worked with TouchDesigner before, or if you've never worked with programming before, don't worry, we're going to take it from the beginning. Besides that, it takes 2 parts. So the first 1 hour will be the introduction, and consider this kind of like a bite-size learn while you're having lunch kind of thing. And then the second part will be an additional hour where we're going to be making a little bit more of an advanced example. But if you followed the first hour, you should be definitely able to follow all the way through. Now, here on my left, I've got the Exploring Technology website open. You can see the link here also, exploring.technology/learn/TouchDesigner. And we'll be following along here. 1 second. Okay, so let's move into the red view. Now you guys can see what I see. Okay, so the Exploring.technology website is where you'll be heading to first. And this is the place where we're sharing all of our learning materials. And here you can see, for example, the one that we did last Friday by Jonas from Generative Design in P5.js. And today you'll be clicking on TouchDesigner. Now, considering most of you guys probably work on a single screen, we're going to have this one open here on the left, and we'll be having TouchDesigner open on the right. And the first time when you open TouchDesigner, you will likely see something like this, like a little example file that is showing a wibbly cube with a slightly different texture than mine. But you can go ahead and click Control A and remove all this, so we have an empty screen. Now, if you've managed to activate it and install it, we're going to be looking first at the navigation of TouchDesigner, because it's maybe slightly different than what you're used to. There's a lot of things going on in this layout, and also it is highly recommended that you use a mouse for TouchDesigner. Of course, if you're on a trackpad, that's not a problem at all, but if you'll be spending a lot of time in Touch, I definitely recommend getting a mouse. Now, TouchDesigner works in a way that it's kind of like folder structures, like very similar to how the Finder works on Mac or Explorer on Windows. And the top bar here, you see this like /project1. That means that we are basically in the container or the folder of project 1. I can also go up a level by hitting U, and then you'll see that this is this big box, and we're actually, if we double click on it, we are inside of this big box. Then most of the things that are going on in TouchDesigner are happening either here on the top, where we have our menu bars, we have links to the wiki and forum and other tutorials, you'll be seeing the frame rate that your computer is currently running on. Like mine is running at 60, yours might be running at 30. It depends a little bit on your graphics card and if you are running on a laptop, maybe if you are plugged into a socket, for example. And with pane layout and so on, you can change the layout. Now we won't be needing this for the moment, but it can be handy if you want to see two different kinds of sketches at the same time. And then here on the bottom, we have this big timeline, and we have these like playback buttons, and we have some settings here. Now, with TouchDesigner, you can do things that are kind of in a similar way to, say, After Effects, where you have a timeline and you can script things along the timeline. This can be very handy. I personally don't really use it so much because most of my work is happening in real time or in an interactive sense. Yeah, this is something that you could use if you need it. Besides that, here we see the FPS. It's the frame rate that also currently my computer is running on. If you want to lower this to say 30, you can do that here in the bottom left corner. And now I'm maxed out at 30. I'm going to bring it back up to 60. So FPS stands for frames per second, by the way, like the frequency at how often TouchDesigner refreshes what is happening inside of it. Okay, so as said, like a mouse is very important in TouchDesigner, and one of the main things you'll be using your mouse for is with left, you can drag, and you see that my cursor also changes into this like 4-directional arrow. With right click, we've got a quick hand menu for adding operators, for example. We'll get to that in a moment. And if I drag on my right mouse click, you can select things. So this is also very handy. Now you can zoom in and out, and you can use that with the regular zoom bar, but you'll notice that if you zoom out too much, that you'll actually end up a level higher. So yeah, you can actually zoom in and out of objects and then enter them or leave them, which is very funky. Not necessarily something you need to use. I personally don't really use it that much. I prefer to use shortcuts. So for example, if I have something selected now, I click enter and I'm inside of it. And if I want to go a level higher, I click U and I go up a level. So enter and U. Okay, let's move forward. Now, the things that you saw in the example file, those are called operators. And operators are kind of like little programs that you can chain together. And these are the main building blocks of TouchDesigner. And yeah, there's many different ones. And they mostly adhere to 4 different categories. There's a few more, but like these are the ones that we'll be dealing with most of the time. So those are tops, chops, sops, and dots. Now, these are very strange names. They're all acronyms. So top stands, for example, for texture operator, channel operator, surface operator, and data operator. And they also all have their own color. So the tops are always purple, then the chops are always green, then the sops are blue, and our dots are this, yeah, kind of red wine color. So yeah, what are tops, for example? Tops texture operators, they are programs that mostly work with pixels. So they're extremely fast and they allow you to do all sorts of pixel animation things. So I just select one right now, just real quick to show you. So here I have, for example, a noise top, and then I can connect that into something else, like maybe a level top. And then I can change what is happening to the input on the left going out on the right. Okay, so let's move towards actually doing something here. You don't have to recreate what I did just here. You can delete that. Let's make a switch. And a switch is a very fundamental component in TouchDesigner, and it's going to allow us to switch between one input and another input. Now, to create your first operator, you're going to hit top. So the top is like on the left side of your keyboard next to the Q in my case, for example. And if you hit top, you get this OP create dialog. There's also other ways of bringing up this dialog. You can also right click with your mouse, and then there's add operator, and then this also brings up your dialog. And you can also bring it up if you are right clicking on the output of a operator, for example. We'll be doing that later. So yeah, with the upgrade dialog open, let's try and find a constant. Now you can do this either by just searching in this menu and clicking the components, but you can also type in the search bar, and it's already selected. Just type constant. Now this one is the only one that highlights. And now if I hit enter, I have my first operator. I'm going to drag it up here. And in order to make a switch, we want to switch between, well, at least two different things. So let's hit Control C with the constant selected, and then Control V, and then we have our second constant. And let's both give them a different color. Now, whenever I select an operator, this window here on the right side is called the parameter window, changes and always shows the parameters related to the operator that I'm selecting. On Mac, this is Command C and Command V, by the way. So if it's Control on Windows, it's Command on Mac. So go ahead and select the first constant, and then on the right side, if you double click on this color, you can change it with another one. You can also change the individual values, but they will update the moment that we select something. Now, the first thing I would like to go for is like a little bright yellow. And for the second one, I'm going to go for this color blue. Now, so as you see, like if I click here, the parameters on the right side, they update. Now we're going to need our switch. So we hit Tab again, and we type switch. Place it here in the middle. And to connect these things, you can hover over the right side on the output of the constant and drag it to the left side of the switch into its input. So let's do this again for the second constant, and you'll notice that both of them fit in the switch. Data in TouchDesigner always flows from the left to the right of these things. So data comes in on the left and it comes out on the right. And in this case, a switch allows you to have multiple things coming in. Some of them only allow you to have one thing coming in. This depends on the type of operator. Okay, so by default, you can see now that our switch is showing the yellow color. If we want to change this to the blue color, we can do this in the parameters of the switch. So here on the right, where we have our parameters, we have this parameter called index, and it's currently set to 0. So you can go ahead and drag them on over, and the moment that you hit 1 or higher, it will switch to blue. So 0, yellow, 1, blue. So most of the things in operators are controlled using parameters, and they're very powerful, and you can also connect these dynamically to other things. We're going to do this in a moment. Okay, so now that we have our switch and we're able to switch between these two colors. By the way, if you ever want to disconnect one of these lines, you can either highlight it and right click and click disconnect, or you can drag it away, I think. There's also a way to, no. You can right click and disconnect it. You can also sometimes, if you would have another one, you can overrule it. So like I can drag another color, for example, let's say maybe this one, and then drag it onto this line, and then I will overtake that connection. Now, the last thing about the switch that you notice here with the parameters is this input up happening here at the bottom. And we see constant 1 and constant 2, which are of course our inputs. And this is showing you an overview of the things that are being put into this switch. And with this arrow here, you can change the order of it. So like right now, I just clicked on constant 2 with the up arrow, and you can see that my wires got interexchanged. If I switch these around again, you see that they switch the other way around again. So if you want to change the order of the inputs that you have, say you have multiple of these, you can do that using this menu. We'll be doing this later as well. Okay, so now that we have our switch, that's all nice and good, but let's try to see how we can make this into something interactive. And for that, we're going to be using a button. A button is something you can find in the comp menu. So you hit top and you click on comp, and here we have button under panels. You can also just type button. A button is basically a sort of component that is built out of several operators. So like I can click in here and go into here and see that it's actually a combination of different operators. Click U again to go up. And basically what components do is they encapsulate operators, just as we are right now inside of this encapsulation of this project 1 folder. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to be switching the button type on the button with the parameters from toggle down to momentary. This is going to allow us to essentially get a pulse of the button whenever we click it. Now, you'll see that so far you cannot really click on the button. It doesn't do anything. You can only go inside of it. And this is because the button needs to be activated. So all of these viewers over here, all of these operators, they show you a preview of what they're doing. And if you click on the plus symbol, this little star icon here on the right, it makes that viewer active. And the moment that it's active, it allows us to essentially interact with what this button is showing or what this component is showing. You'll see that, for example, now, whenever I click, it highlights the button. So what the button gives us is a chop value, and the chop is a channel operator. They are these green ones, and they deal with anything that is essentially data streams related. So this could be parameters or other types of values. This could be something like a sine wave or a string of values, a stream of values. And in order to see this chop, because currently it's not visible to us, it's attached here on the right side, but it doesn't give us a preview yet. We can right click on this preview. We can right click on this output here, and that already instantly brings up the create dialog menu. Now, what we're going to be looking for is a null, N-U-L-L. Now, a null is an operator that exists in all types, and the funny thing about the null is that it doesn't really do anything. It is sort of like an object that you can use to have a central point that you want to connect to. So, for example, a null just gives you an ability to say, for example, say you have some action that you're doing and it's like a lot of components that you're dealing with, then with a null you can tidy this together and make sure that there's one central endpoint. And we're going to be doing the same. We're going to be renaming this null by double clicking on this name element here in the bottom, and then we're going to call it button space state. So then we know that whenever we do other things here, the button state is always the central point that we connect to. And it might not make too much sense in this context, but later on you'll be using nulls a lot to make sure that your networks are organized and to keep them tidy. Okay, so we click on the button when it's active, and we see that this button state null gives us a preview of the data, which is going from 0 to 1. And it has this name on the stream called v1 that's coming out of the button. So that's cool. Now we have something that we could actually use to drive the change of this switch. Because as you guys remember, maybe in our parameter, we also want to go from 0 to 1 to change. So how do we connect these two together? This doesn't happen in the same way as the operators are happening over here and here with these wires. We're going to be doing this using a link a reference. And the cool thing about TouchDesigner is that in all of these parameters, these values here are not just simple input boxes for text, but they actually are much smarter than that. If you click them and open them, they accept 4 different kinds of methods on how you can control the content of those parameters. I'm not going to go too much into them, but we'll be using the first one, which is an expression. And an expression allows us to type Python, essentially, or to use Python to do something within this box. So this is essentially like a mini Python screen terminal, which is really amazing. And if you are a bit familiar with Python, it's very powerful, and it's going to allow you to do a lot of very smart things just inside of these expressions. So with the switch selected, so you can see it has this green arrow around, this green bar around it. We're going to be dragging our button state, and you can see that if we drag it over to the index, that a little plus symbol appears with the arrow. So no plus symbol, plus symbol. And as soon as I let go, nothing happens. Well, this is one of those things again about whether or not a viewer is active. In order to copy a reference from this value or from this stream onto our index, we need to activate the chop. So when we activate it, everything around it kind of disappears. And this allows us essentially to grab the stream from within this operator that we want to take out and connect. So with the button state null active and the switch selected, we're going to be trying it again. So now when I drag and this plus symbol appears again and I let go, I'm presented with this little drop-down menu here, this like quick choice menu. And out of this, we'll be using the second one called chop reference. So I click it, and you'll see that this piece of code here suddenly appeared. So this is TouchDesigner automatically writing for me a little bit of Python that is grabbing this button state null and grabbing the v1 stream out of that. Now what this means is that, and you see this also with this like little dotted line moving in the direction of the switch, that our parameters are hooked up, and we can try this out. So let's click on the button, and you'll see that there we go. Our button switches from 0 to 1, our switch switches from 0 to 1, and we've got a mini stroboscope. Okay, so well, that's a good start. That sounds already really lovely. With this, we can already do many different types of things. Buttons are at the ground of everything. Okay, so let's see. Currently, you know, like it looks nice, but it's a little bit jumpy, and I kind of want it to be maybe a little bit more like a smooth fade kind of thing. And currently, you see, like that's not really possible, or it doesn't look like that. Now, so this is one of the things that I find personally very handy about TouchDesigner. It's very powerful, is that it's very easy to manipulate these kinds of values. So like right now, a value that jumps between 0 and 1, we can make this a smooth value that kind of tweens between them. So what we do is we drag the null a little bit outward, so we have a little bit of space in the middle. And then with the wire hovering over it, we right click onto it and we click on Insert Operator. And what we're going to be looking for is a lag chop, so LAG. So selecting the lag chop, dropping it down over there in the middle. And now if I click this button, you see suddenly that the values are happening in a sort of animated way. So the lag chop takes in our direct change from the button, and with the parameters that it has over here, it takes 200 milliseconds or like 0.2 versions of a second to switch between these values. However, as you see, the switch is not really doing this as well. And this is because on the switch, if we select it, there's a toggle here, and this toggle says blend between inputs. So we toggle that to on, and let's try again. There we go. So now we have a smooth fade happening between our two colors. And yeah, this is our very first start of an interactive animation. Okay, so now that we have this, let's go and try to build something with it. Like this is like a perfect start to branch this out. So I'm going to go to the next section on the website, to the flying tops exercise. And we're going to be making a little spinning, crazy moving triangle object in our mouse that has like a rainbow trail on it. And yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. So what we're going to do first is we're going to move over a little bit to an empty space, and I'm going to hit Tab on my keyboard, and I'm going to go to Comp, and I'm going to look for a container. So container, select the container, I'm going to drop it down, and we're going to rename this container to make it something sensible. So I double click on the name on the bottom here, and I'm going to call this exercise 1 feedback top. So if you've managed to rename it to the name that you prefer, you can double click on it, and I'm gonna check on the chat 1 second, guys. Okay, I'm just going to do a little bit of checking in the message board. I see some of you guys are having trouble catching up. Okay, not to worry. What we're going to quickly do is we're going to show you guys just what we've done so far to quickly recap. Maybe that's a good idea. So I went up 1 level with you, and now I'm back in the level where we were doing the switch. And so what we have done here so far is we've had 2 constants that we connected to a switch. Remember, like, to look these items up, you hit Tab and you go to the top section, and then you type switch. And there you have it. With backspace or delete, you can remove them, by the way. And then after wiring these up, what we managed to do is to drive the change between these 2 dynamically. So we have our button, which we also added from the comp overview. So in comp, under button, and then we added a null. So we go to the chop, add a null, and then we connect the null to our button. And then what we did in the middle here is we right-clicked on the wire, went to insert operator, and then we typed lag, and we added a lag. Then we activated the button, and then our lag became animated. And also make sure that your button is set to momentary whenever we are in the button type under parameters when you select it. Then we activated the null at the end, and then selected the switch, and then dragged the contents of this null that is activated into this index parameter of the switch, and then clicked chop reference. Okay, so I'm hoping you guys are all good so far. let's go ahead and try to get some funky parameters going on with rainbows. All right. This we're going to skip for the moment. It's not so important. Okay, so in order to have our object moving around, we first need to have an empty space, like a blank canvas, more or less. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit top, and we're going to go to top, and we're going to add a constant again. So the constant is going to be the start of our sequence. And currently this constant is white. We're gonna change the alpha and drag it over to 0. So it becomes this kind of like checkerboard pattern, which means that it's transparent. The other thing that we're gonna be doing is we're gonna be changing the size of this top, because you might not notice it right now, but currently it is very small. It is, if we hover over it and middle mouse click, so if you hover over it and just hold your middle mouse, you don't have to if you don't have a middle mouse, we see that the size is only 256 by 256, so a little thumbnail. And yeah, we're going to be wanting to have a bit more resolution than that. Another way to do this, by the way, if you don't have a middle mouse click, is you right click on the operator, and then there is the second option called info. And info also gives you this this info. So we see here 256 by 256. To change this, we have to go to the second section of the parameters under the constant. So we click on common under constant, and under the common section, we see that this output is currently, as we know, set to 256 by 256. And let's go ahead and change that to 1280 by 1280. You can either hit tab to switch between these things, or you can just click them and type it in. And now, if we middle mouse, we see that our canvas size became a lot bigger on this constant. Now that we have our play field, so to say, we can create our object that we're going to be moving around. Remember, we're going to be creating this like little triangle thingy. So below the constant, with a little bit of space, we hit top, and we're going to be searching for a circle. So I type circle, hit enter, and you might be wondering, well, that clearly doesn't look like a circle, Mickey. Why do you want me to put in a circle? And this is because the circle has a lot of different options. Like we can completely customize something that starts out as a circle. And in our case, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be toggling this like bottom parameter called polygon from off to on. You'll see it instantly turns into a circle. And this is because it's currently turned into a circle with only 3 points between it. If I increase this point number by changing sides and going up, you can see that I'm slowly going from a perfect circle down towards a triangle. So triangle is the most minimal version of a circle, so to say. Okay, so to bring these two together, we're not going to be using a switch, we're going to be using something else, because we want this to basically be something where the circle is composited on top of the constant. And well, the perfect operator for that is, if we click add operator, a composite. So we type composite, and a composite does exactly what it says. It composes together different layers. You can kind of think of it as something where you, in Photoshop, for example, have different layers. The composite shop essentially tells you how you want those layers to be composited together. So the first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be dragging our constant into the comp. And then we're going to drag our circle as well into the comp. So nothing happened, we don't see anything. And this is because we need to change the operation. And the operation is over here, and it's currently set to multiply, just as you do with Photoshop, and we're going to be setting this to add. There we go. Now we have our triangle showing up. However, the triangle is massive if you think about the size of our constant here that we set to this big canvas size. We want it to be smaller. So for this, we need to change the way that the comp receives these things. And we're going to be doing this under common. So you go to the common tab under composite, and then we're going to be changing the, give me one second. Apologies. We're going to go to the transform section. And under transform, you can see fixed layer, and we're going to set that to 1 instead of 2. And then the second thing that we're going to do is we're going to set this second parameter, prefit overlay, from fill down to native resolution. There we go. So now we have our triangle on the native resolution on top of our composite, which is this bigger size. And we can start doing things with it. I'm just going to quickly check the chat to see if everybody is all right. All right. So one second. Okay, so one person just pointed out that they have their wires flipped. So maybe you guys remember from the switch that we had this overview here where we see how things come in. So for example, if you have it the other way around, you notice that our triangle got really big again. And this has to do with this fixed layer input. So you can either change the fixed layer from one to the other, or what you can do is you can switch around these connections again so they are right. Remember, if you have a connection that is wrong and you want to remove it, just hover over it, right click, and select disconnect. Okay, so now that we have this, we can move on to the next part. And the next part, we are moving fast actually, to parameters. So I was telling you guys we're going to be having a interactive little thing moving around, and currently it looks all pretty stationary, right? So let's go and change something about that. And what we're going to be using for that is one of the parameters of the composite operator, the one that we've selected right now. If you look here, you can see it has a couple of things like rotate and translate and scale. And these ones, they all have the ability to change what our layers are doing inside of this comp. And the one that we are interested right now is this translate parameter. So we have on the X and on the Y axis, these two that are currently set to 0. And 0 means that it's in the middle. So this point here in the middle, that's 0. And up here is minus 0.5. And down here is 0.5. And for the x-axis, it's the same story. On the left here, we have minus 0.5. And on the right, we have 0.5. So for example, if I would go here and type 0.5, you'll see that my triangle moved over here to the right. I'm going to go ahead and type 0 again, and it jumped back to the middle. Now, one of the things that's pretty handy if you're using a mouse in TouchDesigner is that you can middle click and then hold on these numbers, and then this little window appears, this one with 10, 1, 0.1, and so on. And this is a sort of way to dial up and down variables. So I can go into, for example, point 1, that's already here. And if I drag to the right, you'll see that my mouse is, my object is moving around on the x-axis just by moving left and right while I'm holding the middle mouse button. So this is just a quick way to change parameters. Okay, so as you can see, we have this like x axis that we can move around, and we have this y axis that we can move around. And what I would like to be doing with you guys is to make this little object move in the same way as our mouse does. And for this, we need to go and add a chop. And this chop is called a mouse in chop. So you can go ahead and click top and then click on chop. By the way, if you're inside of this menu, you can also switch between these sections by just hitting top again. So top is just like a quick way of switching these sections. And then under chop, I'm going to type mouse. And you can see there's a mouse in and a mouse out. So we want to have this mouse in one. I click it. And then we have this mouse in chop. And as you move your mouse around, you can already see that this TX and TY value are changing. They are moving around while we are moving our mouse around. Now, the values themselves, they look a little bit strange perhaps, and they might be different from you than they are from me. And this has to do with your screen setup. So for example, I'm using two different kinds of screens next to each other, and therefore my TX value is maybe higher than yours would be. I think on a standard screen, this would be for the X -1 to 1, and for the Y, it would be -0.5 to 0.5. And this -0.5 to 0.5 is exactly the one that we need if we think about our object moving between the circumferences of our area. So we want it to go between 0.5 and -0.5, because then we have these edge cases. So that's, we don't want it to move further than that. So in order to use these values inside of our comp here, we need to make sure that the range that they give is the one that we need for this -0.5 to 0.5 range. And for this, we're going to be using a math operator. But a math operator always works on everything that comes inside of it. There's a way to filter, but we're going to be doing that separately right now. So before adding this math operator, we're going to be looking for a select chop. So I'm going to hit top. I'm going to type select. It's over here. And with the select, I'm going to connect it to our mouse in, like that. And not much has changed yet. We'll simply be seeing the same values in the select chop. But in the parameters of the select chop, we have a couple of options here. And one of those is channel names. And channel names is currently a little star, which means that it just grabs everything. But what the select chop is really good at is it's allowing us to select only parts of what we are getting. So in our case, we select this star symbol, remove it, and then we type TX and we hit enter. And after you've done this, you'll see that only TX is present inside of this chop and that TY got left behind. So this is really good because now what we can do is we can just look at the single value of TX and make sure that it's normalized within this range of -0.5 to 0.5. And in my case, I need to kind of go with my mouse to the left side and see, okay, it moves from 0.3.3 to 4.6, kind of 4.6. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit top again, and I'm going to add a math chop. So chop math, add that one here. And I'm going to wire in this select operator. And the math chop is incredibly powerful. It's very handy. You can do all sorts of things, multiply or merge things together, or subtract values from what you're getting into it. And in our case, we're going to be using a feature that is here on the range section. So with the math job selected, we click range. And then here we see that it has this from range and this to range. And essentially what it's saying here is that everything that it receives from 0 to 1, it's going to scale it to something from 0 to 1. So the same. So nothing changes. But we're going to be using this to our advantage, because what we want to do is we want to scale from 3.2 to from 3.2 becoming 0.5 on the minus, and then this 4.6 becoming 0.5 on the plus. I'm just quickly checking up in the chat if everybody's okay. Okay, cool. So in these parameters, the from range, we're going to be removing this 0, and we're going to be typing, well, in my case, 3.2. In your case, it will probably be -1. So, you know, like just type -1 here. If that's the case when your mouse is hovering all the way here to the left, and that's what the TX is saying. If your mouse values are not changing, make sure that your cursor is within TouchDesigner, so that it's not outside of it. See, it can track it here. And also keep in mind that TouchDesigner needs to be in the play mode. So I was talking briefly about this timeline bar here, and one of the things about the timeline bar is that you can play pause, and some people may accidentally hit the space bar, and you'll see that then it becomes paused. And when it's paused, it doesn't really do anything in terms of connection. So if you've got some weird behavior here, always make sure to check that this button is highlighted so it's playing the animation. Okay, so let's get back to our math here and make sure that this value starts to make sense to us. So we, in my case, want to go from 3.2 to 4.6. So I'm going to write here 3.2 on the from range on the first value, and I'm going to write 4.6 here on the second one. And then the to range, well, we already know where we want to go to, right? We want to go to a range that is between -0.5 up to 0.5. And then what you'll see is suddenly my match job is having a range that is from like, yeah, about -0.5 to -0.5. So this is something that we can start to use here. Now, just like with the switch, what we did before, we can go ahead and activate this math chop and then select the comp and then drag that value over to our translate here on the x-axis. Letting go here, and then you'll see we have our first axis moving along with our mouse. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and right drag and select both of these. I'm going to hit Control C or Command V and then V to paste. And then we're going to be changing this select operator to not look at TX, but to look at TY. I heard one person has an issue with their math operator. Try to make sure that probably what you've ended up doing is typing some text in here and then hitting enter. So make sure that what is inside of here is only numbers and points. Okay, so just to recap, we have our mouse incoming here. We've got a select on the TX, and then we have our math. And in the math under range, we went from our minimum range to our maximum range, and then adjusted that to be between 0.5 and 0.5. And then we copy pasted both of these, and then did the same thing for TY. Now you can go ahead and activate the second math operator and drag it over to the switch, to the comp. So I select the comp, have my math activated, and I drag it over, chop reference, there we go. Now, what you'll notice is that, hey, our mouse is gone, our little object. And this is because the range of the TY is very different than it was on the TX, at least in my case. So I'm selecting this math operator again for TY. And then this from to range, I'm gonna set it from minus 0.5 to 0.5. And that is not what we're looking for. We are actually looking for 0 to, well, 1.2, I would say. Okay, so that's what I'm going to change it to, 0 to 1.2. On the from range, not on the to range. So this should be 0, minus 0.5 and 0.5. And our from range should be 0, and our to range should be 1.2. And now we have our object moving along with our mouse. Just checking quickly if everybody's up to speed. Okay, looking good. Okay, so at this point, I'm assuming you guys all have your object moving along with your mouse, and it's like doing cool stuff, blah, 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 all cool. Let's go and try to work a little bit on this rainbow effect. And for this, we'll need to have a second comp. So I'm gonna move over here, and then I'm gonna hit top, go to top, and then look up composite again. And I'm gonna hook up the second composite to the first composite, like so. And the composite itself, they need to be set to, I think, add as well. We'll see this in a moment, 1 second. Okay, we're moving a tiny bit too fast, so all good. Okay, just to hold on for a second. Okay, I'm just going to show the maths real quick. So we can do this just like below here to show. We're gonna, so you don't have to repeat this, only if you are having issues with math, I'm gonna redo it to show you. So I have Tx and Ty both separately on the select operator. So they are a single stream with only that single value coming in. Then I hit top, I add my math operator, my math chop, and connect that one to my select. And then in the range, I'm going to set the range to be somewhere, if I check here on the left with my thing, it goes 3.3. If you look at the select one operator, 3.2 kind of, to 4.6. So I'm going to put that in my from range, 3.2, 4.6. And then this to range, I'm going to go from minus 0.5 to 0.5. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the TY, adding a second math, connect it. And then in the range, I'm going to go, in my case, from 0 to 1 to minus 0.5 to 0.5. And if this is not yet selected with you, in this case, I'm going to also show that. So inside of our comp, under transform, we have our translate parameters. So I'm going to activate the TX, and I'm going to drag it over to translate, let go, hit chop reference. And I'm going to do the same thing for TY, activate my math, drag it over to the Y variable, and hit chop reference again. And now we have our moving object. Just checking if everybody's got that. Okay, so I'm going to move on towards the rainbow effect, and this is going to be the last thing that we'll be doing, because I think some of you guys might be having things happening at once. So I'm just going to redo this just to get from the scratch. We have our comp. We're going to add a second comp under top. So I'm going to type composite, hit enter, drag it over to the other comp, and then I'm going to make a bunch of space in between, because we're going to be doing some things in between here. Now the second one that we're going to be adding is a feedback top. So hit top again, and we're going to type feedback, and you find it over here. And this is a very powerful operator. You can do many things with it. You can do like crazy slit scan techniques with it and so on. It's a lot of fun to use. And in our case, we need to create a connection from our first comp to that feedback, like this. So just in case you missed that, you drag it from this first comp over to the feedback. And then this feedback, we're going to be dragging into this comp on the second one, like so. Then inside of the feedback, when we have this one selected, we have this target top. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking this second comp and drag it into this target top, like so. And what you should be seeing is this like little dotted line going between them, like this. Then we switch the operation on the comp2 from multiply to add. And then what you should be seeing is already some kind of like crazy behavior like this. So remember, on the feedback, make sure that you have the target top dragged in there. And then on the comp, make sure that the operation is set to add. Now, this doesn't look like a rainbow effect quite yet, but we'll get there very quickly. The first thing that we need to do is, when we have a bit more space here, is behind this feedback, right click on the wire and say insert operator, and then look for a level top. So I'm going to add this level top here. And then on the level top, under post, you can find opacity, and you can set that to 0.95. So only a tiny bit. And now if you move around, you already start to see a little trail like this. So the next thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a little moving trail outward from this. So with the space in between feedback and level, I'm going to click on the wire again with the right, hit insert operator, and I'm going to look for a transform. So click transform. And then with transform, we can do all sorts of manipulations inside of this feedback loop. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to take the scale and we're going to set it to 1.1 and another time to 1.1. And what you'll start to see is like, oh, we get this like crazy outward moving smoke effect. And then lastly, I just select these to make a bit more space here. I would like to add a bit of color in here. So I'm going to right click again, insert operator, and we're going to search for HSV adjust. This one. Drag it in there. And this one is going to allow us to kind of like change the color as it is being repeated under this value here called UE offset. And you can set that one to something very low, like maybe like 7, for example. And then in order to actually have a color change happening, we need to change the color of our objects, because white changing color is just white. So we select the circle, and then on the fill color here, we double click on that color, and you can give it a nice color that you like. I'm going to go again for blue. And there you should start to see already quite some nice edge color effects happening here. Just checking one time on the chat real quick. Okay, just checking quickly. Somebody is having an issue with mapping the mouse to the triangle. Just going over there real quick. Okay, no, we're all good with that. Okay, so now as a last final step to get this to look a little bit more like the example, let's add a blur to this as well. So we're going to be dragging this over, make a bit more space, and here on the empty wire, I right click, insert operator, and I type blur. Now we have our blur in there as well. And I think the only thing that currently is a little bit different is the white start point. I'm just gonna hit reset on the feedback to see if it comes back. Not yet, quiet. Where are we missing this? Okay. Yeah, I think the last thing is actually to set the bitrate to a different one. So select constant, and then under common, change this pixel format from 8-bit fixed to 32-bit. Then we hit pulse on this reset. And now we've got our crazy rainbow colors happening. All right, so there we have it. Now, if you kind of want to see this a bit bigger, you can click on the comp and then right click and select view, and then drag it over a little bit. And then you should be seeing it like this. I'm gonna check on the chat real quick, 1 second. All right, so now we are at 1:05. I understand for some of you guys that you might need to get on with other things, which is totally fine. So yeah, just to quickly recap, I hope that you enjoyed this first introduction to the TouchDesigner. For the ones that are still stuck with things, don't worry, we're gonna get to it real quick before moving on to the other example. Just want to remind you that if you are happy about this kind of stuff and want to learn more about it, that we have our Facebook event, Exploring Technology Live. And for the coming 2 weeks, we have every day during lunchtime a 1-hour talk happening by different lecturers. So for example, tomorrow we have Jonas using augmented reality in the browser with A-Frame. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. Please check back on that. And let's see. Yeah, if you want to recap what is happening here, or if you would like to take your time to things at a slower pace, this website has everything that we've been doing so far also written out as a tutorial. So go ahead and follow that, and please give any feedback if you have any questions or if you notice anything. And yeah, for those of you that would like to stick around for the second hour for the more advanced example, please wait for a moment. I'm going to check on the chat to see if everybody's doing good, and then we're going to be moving on. Thanks. Okay, so I hope you guys are still around. I'm just going to quickly recap what we've done so far with the example, just to make sure that everybody's good with that. And then I'm going to introduce the second exercise. Bear you that this one is a bit more advanced. So I'm also going to be sharing with you guys the source file, so you can actually open up the example file and follow along with a working example, just so you can see already kind of like how I'm setting things up. And it might be helpful to use that as a way to follow along. Now, just to briefly talk once more about the like jumpy rainbow example. We've had some people that are still struggling with getting the mouse to react with the position of the triangle. So for this, I'm gonna briefly recap what's happening here. So we have our mouse in chop, and our mouse in chop gives these two values that are currently not yet the correct values that we want, because we want both of those to be between 0.5 on the minus and on the plus. And what we did was that we selected each of those separately. So we created a select chop and then connected our mouse into that, and then turned the channel name to TX. And then what we did was we added after that a math chop, and under the math chop we went to range, and within range we set that to be from, in my case, 3.2 to 4.6. In your case it might be different. I think for a lot of people this will be actually from -1 to 1. And then we set it to be 2, -0.5 to 0.5. Then we did the same thing for the Y. We selected both of these, hit Command or Control C, and then Command or Control V. Selected then the second math operator, and also made sure that this one was within a range on the Y-axis that we expected. In many people's case, this might already be correct. So then you can just leave it to be either just like 0 to 1 ratio, or you can set it from, well, what you're actually getting, which is -0.5 to 0.5. And then on the other one, also -0.5 to 0.5. But yeah, this depends on the range that you're getting out of your values. This has something to do with the screen size that you have. Then what we did was we activated both of these with the activation like this, and then we selected our comp, and with our comp in the parameters under transform, we set the translate to be those two values. So what we did was we dragged the TX over to the first one, let go, click chop reference, then the second one, drag it, let go onto the second one. And this is how we get movement going from our mouse to our object, changing the position of that layer. Okay, I'm hoping everybody's good with this. For the sake of time, I think it is good to start introducing the second example. Now on the Exploring Technology website, oh wait, sorry, I have one more question in the chat. Okay, so some folks are having a few issues with feedback. So I'm quickly going to show this as well. So real quick, we had our comp, we created a second composite, and then our second composite we hooked up to the first one. Then we set the operation to be add. Then we created a feedback chop. And then we connected our feedback chop to the first comp like this. And then over to the input of the second comp like that. And then with the feedback chop selected, top selected, we dragged our second comp into the target top like that. So I selected feedback 1, my target top is now comp 2, and we start to see things that are adding up together. Then what we quickly did was we added a level, and the level in the post we set the opacity to 0.95, and that's where we started getting our stroke behavior. And then we added before that a blur, and we didn't change anything about the blur, and we added a transform. And the transform, we set it to 1.1 and 1.1. So in between the comp and the feedback, we have our level, opacity set to 0.95 on the post. We have our blur. And under transform, we then set it with the scale from 1 to 1.1 and 1.1. Okay, cool. So hoping everybody's there with the feedback. If you have different colors, then make sure that your constant under comment is set to 32-bit float. I think somebody in my house locked themselves out. 1 second, guys. Okay, so back again. Is everybody good with feedback now? Just to make sure. Okay, so for those of you that have issues with this example right now, I also have this one included in the example file. So let's go ahead and download this one together to make sure that everybody has it. And here you can also see how I've set it up and compare it with your own project. And it also contains the setup for the more advanced example. So we click a little bit onward onto the website until we get to here via the sidebar, TouchDesigner, and then exercise Memphis Doodle. And here you see we have like this like crazy pattern over here happening and a link to an example file. Now this example file contains both this example as well as the example we're going to be creating. So make sure that on Exploring Technology, you're in the sidebar and that you are in the exercise Memphis Doodle here from the selection bar on the left, and that you download this file. Now I'm going to bring this file over as well. And it looks like this. So yeah, for like those of you that had any issues with the feedback tab, like it's over here as well. Just double click on that first thumbnail of the container and you'll be able to see an example file of the same one. And just remember to yeah, like adjust your math operator to be the right from range if you have a different setup than mine. Just checking on the stream real quick. Okay, so the second example, it's a bit more advanced. So if you can't follow along adding operators, don't worry too much about it. You'll probably also enjoy simply watching how this operator is made and to get kind of an idea of like the process of how you go about making something like this. So yeah, for this exercise, what we're going to be doing is like we are going to be taking this, yeah, like classic example of a Memphis look like this one, and we're going to be turning it into something that is moving around and that is animated. So sit ready. As said, I think for the sake of time, it's best to simply do it in a way that I'll be showing and recreating this example, and don't worry too much about doing all the steps yourself as well. You can always follow along with the example file itself later on. Okay, so how do we start doing something like this? How do we start to get something like this moving? There's like a bunch of different kinds of objects orbiting around here, and I'm kind of imagining them all to move around in like random directions, kind of like a little bit jumpy. And yeah, we have this connection between always this like black outline and these like solid shapes. And yeah, these are all different kinds of like interesting elements that we could start to play with. So in the end, I'm planning to make this look like something like this. And the way that I achieve this look is actually by using 3D. You could also do it in 2D, simply using tops, like these like purple ones, like that we did in the previous example. And for this, the first thing we need to do is I'm gonna move this one over here on the side and drag over an empty TouchDesigner file. So I'm going to create an empty operator, an empty container, and I'm going to set the width and height of that container to be 1280 by 1280, which is the maximum size you can use for the free version. And I'm going to rename this to Memphis Exercise. And I'm going to go inside of it, and then the first thing we're going to be doing is to create another container. And this is because we're going to be using something called replicators, which are objects that allow you to make multiple copies of the same object. And we're going to be calling this container master block 1. And I'm going to also change the width and the height here to be 1280 by 1280. And I'm going to go inside of that as well. So we are inside of Memphis exercise and then inside of master block 1. And yeah, with this example, as you can see, there's like different kinds of types. So what we want this master block to do is to basically show one of the types and then having it move around. And let's see. So as said, like we're going to be doing this in 3D, and for 3D we can use these blue ones called subs. So subs are all 3D shapes. They are all things that have something to do with geometry. And let's go ahead and start with this rectangle. And then this rectangle needs to be attached to another operator called a geo, which is a comp here. So what I do is, like, with the output selected of the rectangle, I right click and then head over to the comp section. I hit and type geometry. And then with the geometry selected, we have our first sort of like object that is going to be shown. Now to see if this actually works, I'm going to go up one level and I'm going to add a camera. So under the comp, I'm going to add a camera. And then I'm going to add under the top a render. And then here under common, I'm going to set it to 1280 by 1280. Now, the renderer doesn't see our geometry yet, and this is because if we look under the first tab, it only searches for things in the same level. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be telling it to start looking inside of this master block, for example. So like typing master block 1 and then slash and then a star. And the star means that it will grab anything in that level. And there we have our rectangle, except that it's looking black, which is not yet what we want. So I just right click onto this thing and hit view to be able to see the output as we are dealing with other places. And let's first fix this color issue. So it's because it simply doesn't have a color yet. And in that case, we need to hit tab, go to material, and I would like it to have a constant color. There's also different ones like Phong, for example, which gives you like nice shading and shadows. But in our case, a constant is totally fine. And I'm going to drag it over to the geo and then let go. And then I'm going to drag it, click on this first one called parm material. And now it's the material of our rectangle. And if we click on our constant and we click on the color, you'll see that we can change these colors and then it will update automatically with the color that we like it to be. So that's already step 1. Now we have our rectangle, but we don't have our outline yet. And for this, we're going to do a little trick. We're going to copy and paste the same geo twice from the same source object. And then we're going to add a different material onto it. We're going to add a line material. So I'm going to drag this line material over it, click material, click parm material. And then you'll see that it's currently not yet the right color and the right thickness. So let's fix that. Let's go and set the line near and far color to be black. And then we are going to set the thickness to be 25 on near and 7 on far. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set the edges to be correct because currently they are rounded. So I'm going to go to line and I'm going to switch these to miter and square and square. And then I think the miter threshold needs to be 0. And there we go. Now we have our, sorry, it just went in there, our corners that are sharp. And then I'm going to go up one level, and there we see in our renderer it already shows now a constant rectangle with a line around it, which is exactly the same size. Now to make sure that we have our line offsetted a little bit, I'm gonna simply use a property of the geometry and do the translate a little bit on the left x-axis and on the y-axis. And then if we go up a level and we check on our render, you'll see that it already starts to turn a little bit more into what's happening over here, except of course our things are still stationary. So let's go ahead and fix this as well. We're going to be needing something to kind of like drive the movement. And so, for example, with the last example, we moved the mouse around to be able to use this. Now what I would like to do is use something called a noise chop to drive this movement. So under chop, under noise, I'm going to be adding this noise chop, and you'll see that currently it's like a stream of data. Well, we want it to be only like one point of data. So under common, we hit time slice, and now it only gives us one value. And then under channel, we're going to rename this channel 1 to be tx, and then space bar, and then ty. And currently they are both moving a little bit fast, so I'm going to change the speed of this noise to be a bigger period, like 5. And now we have this sort of like more slow moving noise. And then behind that, I'm going to add a null, and I'm going to call this position. I'm going to activate it, and then under my geo, I'm going to drag it over here on the translate X chop reference, and then the Y chop reference. And then also for the other one, doing the same thing. And some of you guys might be thinking like, hey, we canceled out this offset that we had between them. We're going to be fixing this later. First, we're going to see, and like now we have movement happening on our block. And I'm just going to make this small and then place it next to here so we can see it. To increase that movement, we are going to have to increase the amplitude of this. So if we select the noise and we have our exponent here, amplitude, let's see how far we need to go. Maybe somewhere up to like 5 or something. 5 seems nice. Okay. And the other thing that I would like to do is like create this like offset again. And I'm going to actually do this with a little perspective trick by adding a little bit of depth difference between them. So like one is a little bit further away than the other. So with the line geo selected, I set this one maybe to 0.2 and then, or 0.3. And then we have this sort of like equal parallax effect happening onto them. And currently it's a little bit hard to see with this black background, so let's fix that as well. So we go up one level, and then behind the render, let's add a null also for good measure and call this final. And right click onto that null, hit view. So we have this one to look at. And then we right click on the wire in between and we add a transform. And then under transform, we can say comp over background color and then set this background color to be white. And now at least we have our white background back. So transform behind the render, and we're looking at this final null here. Now I'm going to go back into our master block, and I think the size is a little bit big, so I take this rectangle. No, we're going to fix that later a little bit with the camera perspective, so let's leave this for a moment. So yeah, like what you guys noticed was that we have different kinds of objects, right? So like let's add a second object as well, like this circle, for example. And to do this, what I want to do is I want to create a switch here that switches between the circle and the rectangle for this geometry. So first off, I'm going to create a circle sub. I have that done over here. And I'm going to set its radius to 0.5 on the X and Y. And then over here, I'm going to right click on this line and then add a switch. Select that and connect that over here. And then our switch is going to go into our first geo as well. So it's like the setup is kind of like we switch between these two objects, and then the object that is selected goes into the solid and the line geo. So let's go ahead and try that. There we go. Now we have a different color, different object, but the color is still the same. And that is because like currently we only have one color selected. So we need to make this dynamic somehow. And for this, we're going to be using a different switch, but in the top selection. And this is going to work very similar to our constant switch that we had in the very first example. So I'm going to type constant, I'm going to copy paste it. I'm going to add a switch, and this switch, I'm just going to hook up to those two constants. Then I'm going to give this two different colors. So one of them is this like kind of like light red kind of color, and the second one is going to be for a circle, which is going to be this kind of like, yeah, like blue kind of color, like this. And now, you know, like we can switch between those two as well with the same index number, so to say. And what we need to do now is when we select our constant, we need to drag our switch into here as our color map. And we set our color, I think, back to 1 on all of them. And then with the line doesn't have this color map value. So we need to somehow convert the information that we have here into something that we can stick into our parameters to be able to change these colors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on the output of this switch, and then instead of adding a top, I'm going to add a chop, a top to chop. And what this does, it converts the data from the switch into data for a chop. And as you can see now, it's like these like lines of R, G, B, and A. So red, green, blue, and alpha. And it's like multiple points. Now we only want to have one of those points. So I'm going to go to the crop and I'm going to select pixel. And this only gives me the values of 1 pixel out of this image. I'm going to activate that. And then I'm going to select our line. And then with the line selected, I'm going to drag red to our near color red as a reference, green over here as a reference, and blue over here. Apologies, I just realized that this is actually not relevant for most of these unless it is the line-based ones, which I don't think we're going to be able to manage due to the time. So please forget that. And we're going to set this back to a constant value like this and just keep it at black for the moment. However, now we do have this value that we can change. And a quick way to check that is to actually introduce a parameter that we can be driving for both of those to switch. So I'm going to go up one level and I'm going to right click onto my master block and hit customize component. And customize component allows us to create custom parameters on container objects or other types of objects. And I'm going to give this a name here, and I'm going to call this name type, and I'm going to set it to int. And this is currently between 0 and 1, which is fine for us. I'm going to make it between 0 and 2, just so we can make space also for the triangle over here. And now you see that if I have this like parameters, that there's this like custom section that got added, and our type is now able to go between 0, 1, 2, and 3, or like 0, 1, and 2. And we can use this inside of this block. So we go into this block again, and we create a chop, and we search for the parameter chop, and put it down. Then this parameter chop represents the value that is inside of the parameter above the one here that is selected. And this we can activate by pressing this like activation button. And when we select our switch, we drag it in here over here for the index. And we're going to be doing the same thing with our switch over here. So I'm going to activate this one too. There we go. And now if I go up one level and I change this value, you'll see in my preview here on the left that I'm able to change the type. So this is exactly what we need, except now, we still have only one object. But at least we have something here that we can already start to use to begin changing that number. Okay, so back into this master block, and to start looking at multiple ones at the same time, we can start working on adding a replicator. So we go up one level again, sorry for that, and our master block will be our master component, and then we're going to add a replicator that replicates this block and then sets this type to be different each time. Now, what the replicator does, it's going to change a number behind each of those copies, and it's going to go from like 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., or 0 to 1, and so on. And we can use this to our advantage because we can use that number to set this type. And for this, we're going to be typing a little bit of Python. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type, I'm going to delete this 0 over here, and I'm going to type me.digits. And you'll see that it turned blue, and that if I open this here, we have our me.digits. And this number is actually the number that is in our file name. So if I turn this into 12, you'll see that me.digits turned into 12. So this is a handy way for a parameter to be automatically driven by the number that is on the on the object. Okay, so with this in place, I think we have everything ready to create our replicator. So I'm going to hit tab, and I'm going to go to comp, and then here I'm going to type replicator or RE until it shows up, and I'm going to place that one over here. And what a replicator needs is a master operator, and this is why we created this master block. So I'm going to take this master block and drag it into the master operator. And then nothing happens so far yet. That is because currently the replication method is set to by table, and what we want is that to be a number, just like a fixed number. So now we can start to say, okay, well, we would like to have maybe like 4 replicants, and the suffix, which is this ID number, I would like that to start at 0. And for those of you that have copies that are moving in different places, you can kind of clean that up a little bit with the layout origin and set that off to somewhere maybe like down here, for example. So this is a way to kind of like set the spawning point of where the replicators go. And We're not seeing them yet in our camera, and this is because our renderer only looks into this master block. But we don't really want to have this master block to be something for our camera. We only want it to be able to be used to create these replicators. So I'm going to remove master block, and I'm going to type item, and then I'm going to type star, and then I'm going to keep this slash, and I'm going to keep the star. So what that says is like, look into any item, doesn't matter which number, and then grab whatever you can and show it in our renderer if there's an object that is geometry. I hit enter, and now you can see, hey, we have things going on. There's multiple things that are walking around, except there's a lot of spheres and only one cube. So let's try to turn this into a more diverse party. And the reason why this is happening right now is because we have more replicators than the range of our switch, because our switch only has 2 options, and we are asking it, hey, for example, inside of item number 3, give me index number 3, but it doesn't have index number 3. So it just simply gives you the last value that it's able to give you. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into our master block again, and we need to find a way for this value to be somehow limited. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type, sorry, I'm not going to type, I'm looking at type. I'm going to right click on this type parameter job, and I'm going to select a limit job. And now the limit job, we're going to set the type to be loop, and I'm going to set the minimum to 0, and I'm going to set the maximum to 2 in this case. And now you can see this would have been a good exercise where I could have put a null to make sure that I don't actually have to update these, because otherwise I would have just been able to put this in between my null that is pointing to my references. But now I need to actually update the references over here. So I'm going to activate my limit. I'm going to select my switch, drag it in here, and I'm going to activate, select my second switch, activate it, drag it in here. And now you see that these like lines are actually connecting to these switches instead of our original parameter. And this should help to keep them within a range. To be able to see this now, we need to select the parameter, the replicator again, and then under the replicator, select all to recreate all the parameters. And now they did update, but now we have a different issue. And this is the fact that our noise for those for each of those is exactly the same. You see, and this is the reason why they're all in the same location. So now to counter this, we can use this this parameter again, the one that we have over here. So I'm going to select my noise, and I'm going to have my parameter activated, and remember to grab the first one and not this limited one. And I'm going to drag it into this seed value. And this is going to give me a different kind of like starting point for each of the noise instances to make sure that they're all unique as a starting point. And this is going to make sure that we don't have noise that looks the same. So I'm going to recreate all the operators again. And now we start to see different objects that are moving around in different places and that are like of an equal amount of types. So this is already getting pretty nice. Let's try and see what is one of the last things that we can do. Let's go and add a triangle as well. So I'm going to go back into our master block, and I'm going to copy and paste this circle sub, and then I'm going to set its divisions to 3, just like we've done with this top before. And now we have a triangle. And I'm going to connect this triangle to our switch. And then I'm going to move over to our colors, and I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to copy paste this constant, and I'm going to set this constant to be this like kind of bright yellow, and I'm going to drag it into our switch. And I think our limit type was already set to a maximum of 2, which is basically 0, 1, 2, I think. Let's check that, which gives us then these like 3 different options on the index. So I'm going to hit all again to change them. And it turns out we need to have one more. So when we select our limit, we need this maximum to be 3 instead of 2. And we try again. There we go. So now we have circles, triangles, and rectangles moving around, looking pretty random. I'm just going to quickly check on the chat to see if everybody's okay. Okay, looking good. Okay, so for the sake of time, I'm not going to show all of the different ones that I've added in the final one, but you can go ahead and like dissect the original example file, and also over time I'm going to be updating the examples on the website to make sure that these are all in there step by step. But let's take a look and see if we can add one more element at least to make sure that we get a bit closer. And for this, I think what I would like to do is introduce you guys to a bit of chop stuff. Yes. So what we're going to be doing is this rectangle here is one of the ones that actually would be much nicer if it would have like some kind of rotation to it, and the same goes for this rectangle here as well. With the sphere, of course, we won't be able to see it. And to do that, we need to calculate a sort of direction from it. And yeah, we're going to do this using chops. So I'm going to go into our master block again, and then with a little bit of space over here, let's go and take our noise, which is actually the starting point that is driving the positions of these objects, and add a lag to it. And lag is also what we used in the beginning to drive a little bit of animation on our switch, and it's basically kind of like a value that's always like lagging behind a little bit of what you're putting into it, in our case our noise. And what we can do now is we can basically subtract these two from each other, and then we get a value that is a direction vector. And what a direction vector gives us the ability to is to calculate, well, the direction or the heading of where something is going. So right now we have where something is, we have where it used to be, and the difference between those two we can use now to calculate this direction. So first off, these two positions, we need to subtract them from each other. So this I'm going to do with a math chop. And I'm going to hook up our noise to the math chop, and I'm going to hook up our lag to the math chop. And now you see that it actually duplicates these txtdy values. This is because we need to combine these chops under the parameters to be subtracted from each other. So now we have this like smaller, different kind of value. And this is already pretty good, but this is not yet something that we could use directly. So we need to use a formula here called atan2. It's a common mathematical formula to calculate this direction vector, and or like calculate this direction value. And this is something that we can find inside of the formula, function chop. So I'm adding a function chop here, and this function chop has a drop down for like all sorts of like common formulas that you might use. In our case, we are looking for this atan2 value, and this is something, for example, you can also see this in other programming languages like processing, for example, where when you would calculate the heading, this is the same formula you would use. It's it's based on trigonometry. Now, to put this one in here, we need to give it two values. Like it expects two different parameters, input 1 and input 2. And that means that we need to split these up again into 2 in order to be able to feed them into this function. So just as we've done with the other example, the first one, we're going to use a select, and we're going to set this to tx and hook it up. And then I'm going to copy and paste it and set it to ty. And now we have these like separated again, just like we did with this mouse example. And now what I can do is like I can take the select and put this one in the top version, and I can take the second one and put it into this other one. And there we have a value that looks a lot more like regular degrees. And the only issue with this one so far, I believe, is that it is, well, we can try this. Like, let's add a null here quickly. And we call this rotation. And I'm going to activate it. And then inside of our geometry, I'm going to look up this rotate, and this is on the different axes, so X, Y, and Z. So I want to rotate it on the Z axis. I'm dragging in this rotation value. There we go. And well, with a circle, this doesn't look very interesting, of course. So like, let's do the same thing also for this one over here. And then we're going to update the replicators to see this. So I'm going to go up one level, change them to all. You see there's already a lot of movement happening, but it looks a little bit random. And that is because we need to add about 90 degrees to our rotation to make sure that it actually moves in the direction that it's thinking that it's going. So I'm going to make a bit of space in between here. I'm going to right click, insert operator, then hit math. And math has this multi-add function. And then in the post add, I'm going to set this to 90. And that should give us the right kind of like direction as a starting point. So there we go. And now if you look specifically at, say, the rectangle, the triangle, you'll see that the triangle is moving in the direction that it is going, except I think it's inverted. So let's take a look here quickly. Yeah, I think it's inverted. So like, let's try to do that here as well. In our math, we set our multiply to -1 instead of 1. And it should already be enough to fix that. There we go. See, so now they're actually moving in the direction that they're going. All right, so there we have it. We have, I mean, we're currently a little bit up close. Let's go and fix that as well. And we can either do that by just like changing this camera position here. So it's currently 5 on the Z. We can bring this up to maybe something higher so we can see everything, like 10. And one thing that I personally really like a lot is the arc camera. It's a different camera that you can find in the palette browser. And then you can use your mouse to change the orientation of the camera. So I'm going to hit dialogues, and then I'm going to click palette browser. You can also hit Command B or Control B to bring that up. And then under tools, you'll find arc ball camera. And if I drag this one in, it kind of brings me this like component that already is able to sort of demonstrate that. And if I activate it, you see I can change the position of this. And if I go into this, I can just literally like copy and then steal that camera here to use it in my own example. So I delete this one again, I have my camera in my clipboard, I delete this camera, and then I paste it in the one that came out of my clipboard. And now if we go up one level and right click on this Moses exercise and then scale it down a bit. And currently it's still all black. That is because we need to change our look under the look here to look at our top that we are using for our preview. And then for this we type ./final, which is like our final null that you could find here. And currently we're still not yet able to move. And this is because in panel, we need to enable the UV buttons for left, middle, and right. And then I think that should be it. Let's see. We're still stuck. Where are we stuck? Ah, yes. So sometimes if this happens, it is because you're actually dragging something invisible in our case. So like we're actually being blocked from tracking the position of this mouse onto the camera because these items are sort of like activated. So what we need to do is like under our master block, under panel, we turn off display. And then when we recreate all of them, we should, yeah, there we go. So now we have all of them moving around. And there we go. So like one last final quick thing you might have noticed is that there's like some overlap happening. And in our case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fix this by adding the third dimension as well. So adding a Z position to what we want. And this is something that you can do by clicking on the noise, going to channel, then type TZ. And now we have a third one. And then in the geo, we select it and we activate our position. Place this one with our translated value. And then in the case of the line, I'm going to do plus 0.3 to give it a little bit of this offset in front of the other one. And then with the solid one, instead of 0, we also add this Z position. And then when we recreate our replicators, there we go. We have a much more dynamic 3D kind of example where things are moving around in all dimensions. And there we have it. So I'm just quickly going to check on the chat. Okay, cool. I really hope that you enjoyed these last 2 hours playing around with TouchDesigner, getting familiar with it. I hope it wasn't too overwhelming. It can be a bit confusing when you have so many of these different kinds of concepts moving at you in the same time. Trust me, this is something that gets a lot better very, very soon. And yeah, I think it's an incredibly versatile tool that is not just something that you can use for very artsy things, but you can also use it for very applied and practical things. It's used within the industry a lot for events, but it's also used, for example, within like retail or any kind of like space where you want to be able to manage content dynamically in real time. And you can also hook up a whole lot of things inside of it. For instance, coming Thursday, we're going to be visualizing point clouds using TouchDesigner, but you could also use it, for instance, for like 3D cameras and connects. That is it from our part. Check out tomorrow. Jonas will be giving a introduction to augmented reality in the browser using A-Frame and ARJS. And yeah, if you have any questions, like stick around in the chat. You can also post anything you want to mention or ask on our event page on the Facebook page, which you can find over here. And yeah, if you want to get in touch, my name is Mickey van Olst. You can find me either on the internet or on Instagram or Facebook, whichever way you prefer. And I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much.